What should one do if somebody in one's life is causing us consternation, emotional pain? There are videos, for instance, that say, so-and-so is a narcissist, and here's how you handle them. Well, first of all, one individual also says, you shouldn't worry about calling somebody a narcissist. It's not hurting their feelings or disrespecting them. Well, perhaps it's useful to have a term for certain aspects of some types of people, but surely we can come up with words other than something nobody wants to hear. Who wants to hear, for instance, being told, "Oh, you're a liar"? Indeed, facetiously speaking, who wants someone also to tell us, "You would sell your mother down the river for a nickel"? Now, this person, in particular, I'm talking about giving advice on so-called narcissists, urges people generally to walk away. Well, I think there might be a lot of merit in that, but is that always going to have to be the case and for everybody? At least maybe we should know why we're walking away if we deem it in our best interest, or as sometimes is called gray rocking or whatnot. A personal example. I took my mother, 84 and a half, to the physician a month ago, and there was a man, he must have been about 50, very heavy set, in a wheelchair. He was a minority. He had an oxygen tank, and the tank was running low on air. He had shown up maybe a few minutes late for his appointment, and then he had to wait and wait and wait, and he basically ran out of oxygen. Well, when he brought this up to the physician, or rather the office person there, he was told, "Well, you're late, and so you're going to have to wait." And he said, "Well, my air is running out." And I suppose if he weren't careful, police might have been called, or an ambulance to take him to an emergency room, and high costs paid. So maybe he decided it's not just worth advocating for myself, and basically became silent. As I observed, the individual, having perhaps a 6th grade education functionally, and a minority member, deemed it in his best interest not to advocate for himself, basically, or what you might call out the other person. And I think in general, we are not taught words that are appropriate to speak with respect and to advocate about anything, including hence the phrase too, calling someone out. We might also not realize that the legal ramifications of calling someone out can be quite dire, and that if they're, quote, going to pay a heavy price, they might want something in return. For instance, E.V. Pamperis, who wrote a book, Bulletproof, gives a sort of trade, whereupon when she was working, I think, for the Secret Service, or else it was the FBI, she made a trade with people. You tell me what I need to know, and I will treat you with such respect that you will be happier to get that self-respect from me, and pay the price of going to prison to get it. But in general, how many people can do this? For she has videos out, for instance, telling people how, if you're, say, a police officer, you should count it a feather in your cap if you never have to pull out your weapon once in your entire career, that your weapon is your words. In other words, respectful words. The same coming from a man, I'm trying to remember his name. He wrote a book, Never Split the Difference, and he talks of the same issue. And he goes by the name the Swan Group, I believe. Respect being key. If you're going to go to the courtroom, if you're going to call someone on the carpet, if you're going to confront somebody. Otherwise, what might happen? What happens all too often, I'm afraid, or not afraid, you get it back in your face. As per many a person starting a Me Too movement, I might surmise. Now, I hold in my hand here a printout I just made of an article from the internet, written by the Honorable Michael L. Stern, and it's entitled Lincoln's, or rather, Lawyer Lincoln's Trial Tactics, and the subtitle, How Abraham Lincoln Developed His Trial Skills and Prepared Himself to Persuade Juries. It further goes to say, from his admission to the bar in 1837 and until he became president in 1861, Abraham Lincoln tried hundreds of jury trials. He was pretty good at it. The article goes on in a few moments to say, Lincoln's success was based on his exceptional diligence, power of concentration, and focus on detail. And then, as per a paragraph later, Lincoln's trial methods depended on forming factual blocks of information that he molded into a clear, credible, and forceful narrative. His methods are well illustrated by his defense in the 1857 trial of Heard versus the Rock Island Bridge Company. Half a page later it says, Lincoln's painstaking preparation formed a trial plan that was brought to a climax in his closing argument. According to an observer, Lincoln's examination of witnesses was very full, and no point escaped his notice. I thought he carried it almost to prolixity, but when he came to his argument, I changed my opinion. He went over all the details with great minuteness until court, jury, and spectators were wrought up to the crucial points. And then it talks about a paragraph later. Abraham Lincoln's capacity to spin a yarn was well recognized by those who knew him long before he determined to become a lawyer. He could sit around the proverbial cracker barrel and tell an entertaining or humorous story with the best of them. And then it goes on to say he used the age-old mechanism of storytelling to guide jurors, ease them into following the action, and then lead them to his intended conclusions. Yet a paragraph later, in preparing for trial, Lincoln walked the walk to ensure that every aspect of the trial conveyed a consistent message. Yet another few paragraphs later, Lincoln had accomplished his objective by presenting a plausible, completing story with a defined structure that provided factor after factor how and why the eyewitnesses might have been mistaken. Through his tightly worded questions, he constructed a coherent narrative that kept the jury anxiously wondering how his cross-examination could overcome the facts seemingly stacked so high against the defendant. Yet another paragraph or two later, Lincoln's story of the case in the Armstrong trial was not a boring pile of miscellaneous information, unexplained disparate events, disconnected or dud witnesses, an incoherent jigsaw puzzle or confusing roadmap that left jurors without direction. His every action was aimed at creating tension and conflict that compelled jurors to listen and follow along. By relating a purposeful story that made sense, he cast doubt on the prosecution's case and gave the jurors the ammunition to reach their own decision to acquit his client. Yet another paragraph later, Lincoln did not hesitate to look jurors right in the eyes and straightforward and without exaggeration tell them exactly what he wanted them to do. One colleague commented that clarity, conciseness, and simplicity of statement were his forte in the trial of a case. His mind was orderly. He could marshal facts in such an orderly sequence and reduce a complicated problem to such simple terms that even the dullest layman could not fail to understand. Also, as part of tactics, a few paragraphs later it says, where many lawyers would raise an objection or minor technicality for the record, Lincoln often would let a point pass without protesting. If a point did no great harm to his overall strategy, it was not uncommon for him to let it go by, saying no more than he reckoned it would be fair to let this in or that, or admit the truth to the inconsequential. As one attorney said, by giving away 6 points and carrying the 7th, he carried his case, and the whole case hanging on the 7th, he traded away everything which would give him the least aid in carrying that. Any man who took Lincoln for a simple-minded man would soon wake up with his back in a ditch. At the last paragraph, perhaps, Lincoln's ultimate aim was to gather together the facts, apply logic and common sense, and then, through his closing argument, urge jurors to commit to his position during their deliberations. And then, a few sentences later, by the end of a trial, he usually had what he needed for argument. Without pounding on the table, losing his temper, bullying, or strutting about, he could move jurors with a low-key logical plea premised on the facts and justice of the case, not mere emotionalism. And I would kind of close this with some words from the 9th chapter in a book by Tony Robbins, or it's entitled Anthony Robbins, the Life Coach, Business Life Coach. Awaken the Giant Within, with a subtitle, How to Take Immediate Control of Your Mental, Emotional, Physical, and Financial Destiny. Now, the heading of Chapter 9 is the vocabulary of ultimate success. And a subtitle, A Powerful Agent is the Right Word. Whenever we come upon one of these or those intensely right words, the resulting effect is physical as well as spiritual and electrically prompt. That being a quote by Mark Twain. A page later, Tony Robbins says in his own words, realize now the power that your words command if you simply choose them wisely. Yet a paragraph later he states, people with an impoverished vocabulary live an impoverished emotional life. People with rich vocabularies have a multi-hued palette of colors with which to paint their experience, not only for others, but for themselves as well. And on page 205, Tony Robbins states that I realized that by changing my habitual vocabulary, I was transforming my experience. I was using what I would later call transformational vocabulary. There's also a quote on page 206 by Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. Words form the thread on which we string our experiences. And then at the bottom of 207 page, if we want to change our lives and shape our destiny, we need to consciously select the words we're going to use, and we need to constantly strive to expand our level of choice. Yet another quote from the book on page 209. Thus, it's important to realize that words shape our beliefs and impact our actions. And yet a paragraph later, by Confucius, without knowing the force of words, it is impossible to know men. One last thought then, from my own personal experience, and probably many, we've heard the phrase, don't stick your foot in your mouth. Or sometimes bite your tongue until you calm down and see things more rationally. Well, perhaps that all involves in my bailiwick doing this in order to have a better word choice, a more respectful word choice. So, to the extent somebody is not a trial lawyer like Lincoln, or an Anthony Robbins, Tony Robbins, so to speak, then perhaps the advice of some, quote, leading experts on the topic of, quote, narcissism might hold true quite a bit. If you're not a good trial lawyer, you might not want to go to bat trying to defend yourself in court yourself. Or if you're a lawyer and of not great acumen in that department, defend a client who wants dire results and is in the capacity to pay somebody for it too. It would be an unhappy camper if they didn't get the results they wanted. It all comes in my mind to building, yes, a logical argument like Lincoln. Secondly, though, to the extent Lincoln was or wasn't respectful in all terms, that we have respect for everybody. Hence the term coming from the mouth of Robert Redford in the movie The Unfinished Life, I believe, with Morgan Freeman, where he said at one point, I expect everyone who comes to my house to be treated with respect, or words to that effect. That then is why I think it is said so often we should identify, quote, a narcissist and run for the hills or gray rock them or don't engage them. I suppose you would either not get very far, as this one leading expert has stated, you're not going to get results anyway, the individual said. And secondly, it could blow up in your face, I suppose, and you injure their pride as per narcissistic wounding, so to speak, and you regret it. And so I'm not surprised the advice. And I'm not surprised then the advice either that you can't, quote, help a, quote, narcissist by loving them. For in my book, love is understanding. And as per too, an interesting video by Jim Anderson on YouTube about 3-4 years ago, acceptance is the first step to love. And what is acceptance except understanding, and understanding, of course, requiring proper or optimal vocabulary to also string together a strong logical argument, but a respectful one too. So a person's task is cut out for them if they are not a trial lawyer, so to speak, and of great acumen, trying to defend themselves against someone accusing them who is in turn termed a narcissist. No wonder it said, gray rock them or keep your distance. I don't know what to advise. I'm not a lawyer myself, of course. I've had plenty of mathematics and electrical engineering studies in a 4-year stint at West Point, but other than that, it's an interesting situation, isn't it? Food for thought here.